Terry Bolo here, Trudy from the original Terry, and you are listening to Tommy Throwback Kovac on Splat from the Past. Fun fact, if you tickle Tommy, he puts a couple in.
Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror and sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today I will be welcoming probably the first writer in the history, first female writer in the history of Saturday Night Live, a fucking pioneer and legend herself, Ann Beats. I am so fucking excited. I think that she is one of the funniest ladies ever. I'm having her on the show today talk about how she got started in the advertising business and then she worked her way all the way to National Lampoon magazine, and then she wrote for Saturday Night Live for years, and then she wrote and created the show Square Pegs, and she's done a lot of other things too that I want to bring up, and I can't wait. I mean, she's a funny lady, and she's got a brilliant mind, and it's going to be extraordinary. There's no other way of putting it. So, yeah, here is my interview with Ann Beats. Hey, Ann.
Hello, how are you?
I am great. How are you?
I'm okay. It's Ann, by the way.
I called you Ann.
You called me Annie.
Did I call you Annie?
Ann Beats.
Yeah, sorry. Too much coffee. Well,
Okay.
this is such a great honor. Thank you for taking the time today.
That's all right. Where are you?
Redding, California.
Uh-huh.
Yep. So, going back in time, were you a funny kid growing up?
I think I like to make people laugh, especially if I could make my parents laugh. I was quite pleased about that.
Mm-hmm. Did you come from a funny family?
My father was really a fan of comedy. Actually, he was a big fan of Jerry Lewis, and my mother wasn't, which some occasion disagreements between them occasionally. But I remember a couple of instances of creating laughter when I was a kid. One was unintentional, and that was when I was really small, and I was in the movies with my parents, and they showed President Truman in a newsreel, and I said innocently, "Oh, there's that S.O.B. Truman," thinking that was his name.
Yeah.
Because that was the only way that I had ever heard my father refer to him. And since we were in Greenwich, Connecticut, it was a fairly conservative audience, and they all started laughing when I said that as a little kid. And another time was also in the movies when, and that was on purpose, when we were watching this movie called Wagons West, and there was a woman giving birth on the wagon train. It was very dramatic, and I said, "Quick, fetch the boiling water." And everybody in the audience cracked up, and I thought,
Wow, so you always had that...
Give myself a metaphoric pat on the back. I was probably about 5 or 6.
Yeah, so you always had it then.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
So, yeah, so I would say, that I didn't really think of it as something that could be harnessed and turned into money.
Of course not, at least not in those days,
Yeah, no, and I mean, now, I teach courses in comedy writing in college, but I mean, in those days you really couldn't do anything like that. You couldn't treat it as a profession of any sort.
Yeah, something you...
It was just kind of, comedy was something that people fell into because they couldn't get up in the morning.
Yeah, something they fell into or they were born into.
Well, they couldn't hold down a straight job, so...
Yeah.
But initially, I worked in advertising as a copywriter, and of course you do need to have a sense of humor for that.
Yeah. So did you write for your school newspaper?
I was the editor of my high school newspaper.
Nice, nice. I'm
And
sure.
then I worked for the McGill Daily. I went to McGill in Canada and Montreal, and there was one of the not that many universities that had a daily newspaper that was put out by the students, and that sort of became my life at college, actually. And I went back not too long ago. I went back to Montreal for the 100th reunion of the McGill Daily, as I figured I wouldn't be around for the 200th.
Yeah.
And so that was, something that I did to the detriment of my studies in college, but it actually helped me to get work later.
Mm-hmm. So you took
because I got my first advertising job on the strength of having clips from the McGill Daily.
Yeah. So you took the initiative early on that you were going to be on this writing trajectory.
No, I didn't really. I didn't really think of it as a career.
Mm-hmm.
And I managed to get a job as a copywriter kind of because I didn't have that many skills. So it was something to pay the rent, doing advertising copywriting, but it wasn't something that I was very passionate about, and I really didn't know how that was going to be a road to being, a real writer.
Mm-hmm. What kind of products did you do advertising for?
Well, I actually got my first advertising job when I was in college. I was writing copy for a department store in Montreal called Holder Renfrew, which is kind of a fancy department store.
Mm-hmm.
And I was writing newspaper ads for them, which was kind of interesting because it was like, it was like doing a crossword puzzle or something. I mean, you had to fill a certain amount of space, and you had to know that like an M took up more space than an I or whatever when you're writing headlines. And then from that, I managed to get a job working for an agency called McKim, which they later merged with Benton & Bowles, McKim Benton & Bowles in Toronto. And that job, at the time, they were interested in hiring me, and I said that I didn't have a television. And they said, well, we don't know. We've written this copy, but we don't know if you can write TV commercials. So can you write a sample television commercial? So I wrote a sample television commercial for them for one of their products, Jell-O pudding and pie filling. Mm-hmm. And I actually accidentally wrote a commercial that was almost identical to the one that they had on the air at the time. So I guess they thought I was like either really smart or really stupid, and I guess they decided that I was really smart, and they hired me. And then they said, you have to get a television. But anyway, so that was how I started out as a copywriter. Mm-hmm. And then I worked as a copywriter in Toronto, in Montreal, and in London, England in the 60s.
And did that lead to National Lampoon?
Well, no. What led to the National Lampoon? Well, in a way, because what led to the National Lampoon was being set up on a blind date with by someone who I had worked with in advertising, Sean Kelly, who was starting to write for the National Lampoon and knew this guy, Michel Chiquette, who had introduced him to the Lampoon, actually. Was these two guys, Henry Beard and Doug Kenny, were starting this magazine, humor magazine in New York, and Michelle and Sean were writing for it. And I was set up at a blind date with Michelle, and I ended up having a relationship with him and, quote-unquote, helping him with his work, mm-hmm. which led to me actually getting material into the National Lampoon. So I always say that I got into comedy the same way that Catherine the Great got into politics, on my back.
That's a good way of putting it.
So anyway, so Michelle ended up bringing me to New York with him, and where he lived in a 5-flight walk up on St. Mark's Place, where actually the janitor had written "vomit outside, not in here," in the hallway. Michelle would bring me to these dinner meetings that they would have. They would, buy everyone dinner in lieu of really paying them well, at the Lampoon, and then, I would not just sit there, I would suggest ideas, and then they would say, well, later when they were looking at the napkins that people had scrawled ideas on, well, whose idea was that? And it would turn out to be my idea, and then if they wanted to use it, they would sort of have to use me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I started writing for the Lampoon.
Did you realize at the time that you guys were right in the middle of a comedy revolution?
No. I don't think people usually realize that they're in the middle of revolutions when they are. But I think in retrospect that what was interesting about the Lampoon was that it was a way for what had been sort of underground comedy to come above ground and move from the Village to Madison Avenue, as it were, and just down the street from Mad Men in a different building. They rather interestingly named Vision Building, but it was called that because it was in the center of the Eyeglass District in New York, not because of any visions of the future. The Lampoon survived partly because of the genius of a guy named Jerry Taylor, who became the managing editor, and at that time, cigarette advertising was kicked off TV, and so Lampoon picked up the slack and carried a lot of cigarette ads, and that sort of helped it to survive and get into the black, as it were. And interestingly, Jerry Taylor was married to Mary of Peter, Paul, and Mary at the time, Mary Travers.
Yeah.
Later when I was working in television, people used to say things like, well, do you feel like that by working in television you're selling out? And I was like, I got my start by giving cancer to college students, so I basically don't think there's much room to sell out anymore.
Yeah. So it was you, Doug Kenny, Michael Donaghue. Who else was there?
Well, Sean Kelly and Michelle Choquette and Sean Kelly, and there was a Canadian contingent, and Bruce McCall, and came to the magazine, and Chris Miller, of course.
Yeah.
And P.J. O'Rourke. Those were kind of the main contributors.
Harold Ramis?
No.
Okay.
Harold Ramis never wrote for the Lampoon. Harold Ramis was strictly part of the movies.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I never knew if he wrote for the magazine or not.
No, he didn't write for the magazine. And it was an interesting. It was interesting because it was a magazine with a very small staff of contributors, as it were. Was put out by a very small number of people for a major magazine. Yeah. Harry Catchpole was another person. Mm-hmm. But he was in Boston, I think, or no, where was he? He was in I think he was outside of Boston at that time. Mm-hmm. So some people sent in material, and other people were like in the office all the time, and and certain people actually were on staff. Of course, Henry and Doug, and then Michael, I think, had an office there, and I think he was getting paid, actually monthly, and Tony Hendra also.
Yeah. Did you have to fight hard to gain acceptance from everybody?
Did I? They used to let me write things about sex, because I think they sort of thought that was like, oh, she knows about that. She's a girl. But really, Henry and Doug kind of thought that women were like another species, like horses or something. Like, What do women eat? They'd gone to Harvard before there were any women at Harvard.
Yeah.
And also, Doug was always something of a success with the ladies, and was even was married for a while. Henry was a virgin during the first 2 years I knew him.
So they went to you for all the sex content.
Well, they like, if I pitched something about sex, like Mother's Little Helper, which is pornography for women, they figured that, okay, we'll let her write that because she knows about it, or a parody of the story of O that I wrote.
Yeah. Do you know who came up with the magazine cover with the dog with the gun to its head?
I think it was Ed Bluestone, who was also just a contributor.
Yeah, that was just so. That was just so.
Buy this magazine or we'll shoot this dog. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was also, I think, the genius of Michael Gross in selecting a really very appealing-looking dog. The photograph makes it.
Yeah.
The wrong dog, it wouldn't work.
Yeah. A couple years later, Cheech and Chong did a bit where the dog has a gun up its nose, and the only way to get it out is to pull the trigger.
Oh dear.
That was bad.
Yeah, I think, it was definitely, dog casting was very key to that cover.
Yeah. Did you write for National Lampoon Radio Hour?
Yes, I did indeed. And in fact, I was having, a hard time winning acceptance there always. And I was, the only woman. And, other than secretarial staff. And I had lunch with Henry and, sort of accosted him about how come, I wasn't getting more equilateral treatment. And he said, I just don't think chicks are funny. And, I should have just punched him right in the nose. But instead I cried and I lost a contact lens in my soup. And then I never wrote for the magazine again. And I just wrote for the Radio Hour, because I had switched boyfriends in mid-magazine and was with Michael Donaghue at that point, and he was doing the Radio Hour, and, it was pretty easy for me to write for it.
Yeah, I never understood those boys' club mentalities.
Yeah, it was the ultimate boys' club.
Yeah, that's just unfortunate.
But, I had a good run for my money, sort of being the girl on the magazine for a number of years.
Yeah.
And then I contributed another piece to the self-indulgence issue. I did appear in the magazine 2 more times after that, and one was that I contributed something called Little Beatsy, which was a parody of Little Lulu, to the self-indulgence issue, and it's like this little Lulu type girl trying to get into the boys' clubhouse. Mm-hmm. And ultimately they kick her out. They invite her in and say, maybe she'll make some sandwiches. And then ultimately she proves too much for them and they kick her out. So I did contribute that. And then I also did a piece once that they used in the magazine because I'd done it for the Radio Hour, which was called The Nazi Dr. Dolittle. He made the animals talk. Yeah. and I'd done it with Belushi on the Radio Hour. Belushi played the Nazi Dr. Dolittle and Michael played the cat who was being tortured and finally confesses that the catnip mouse is under the refrigerator. And they thought that was such a great idea that they wanted to do a visual version of it, and that was in the magazine with my byline. But other than that, that was it for me.
Yeah, there were some great bits on that Radio Hour, though. They're like Tony Hendra doing the John Lennon Magical Misery Tour.
Right. That was Michael and Tony when they were still friends.
Yeah. And, of course, the Mr. Rogers one with Bill Murray and Chris Guest.
Yes, well, that was kind of after Michael and I had left. Mm-hmm. Because Bill didn't come around until after we left. And then John was running it. Belushi was running it after Michael.
Yeah. Did you take part in the Lemmings?
Mm-mm.
No. Yeah, I heard Chris Guest brought that back about a year ago or so, and who's going to do an HBO.
Everyone thinks that I did.
Uh-huh.
And I was invited to the Lemmings reunion or whatever, which I went to because I happened to be in New York at the time, where they had, what's his name? The guy from SNL who died, who just was such an idol of John Belushi. He idolized John, and he did John's Cocker, but not as well as John, but he did recapitulate it for that.
Chris Farley? No.
Yeah, Chris Farley.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he really hero worshipped John in all the wrong ways.
Yeah.
But I submitted material for Lemmings, but it was made more awkward by the fact that I was joining forces with Michael O'Donoghue, who was in a total war with Tony Hendra, who was running Lemmings. He and Sean were doing Lemmings. So none of my material ever made it into the show. But I'll take it, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, because you're from that era,
Mm.
So,
yeah, when they were about to do a revival of Lemmings.
Right.
The people who bought the Lampoon were going to do a revival of it. And it was in rehearsal and underway when the whole COVID thing happened.
Yeah, they were going to film like an HBO special. That's what I read.
Well, I don't know about that. But they were going to do performances in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was canceled. And they did revive the radio hour, but I never heard what they did with it. But they didn't use pieces from the old radio hour. They just did some new version of it, but I never listened to it as a podcast.
Mm-hmm. How does Saturday Night Live come into the picture for you?
Well, then what happened is that Michael and I left the Lampoon abruptly due to sort of a ridiculous argument that Michael got into with Maddie Simmons over the fact that Maddie Simmons had given my desk away to his son. And I came into the office on Easter Sunday to go out to brunch with Michael, who was just finishing up editing the radio hour for that week, and which time was a half hour actually, because it got changed to a half hour. And Michael and Bob Tischler used to pretend that it was an hour and that the other half of it had been censored, but it was only a half hour. And they were just finishing it, and I came in and found out all Michael Simmons things in my desk, and I freaked out, and I said, okay, that's it, take my material out of the show, which would have meant that they would have had to, redo the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so Michael called up Maddie, and Maddie was very annoyed at being interrupted on his Sunday, and although he was Jewish, he wasn't celebrating Easter, but I guess he was watching the football game or something, and and he was like, okay, if your girlfriend doesn't like it, she can quit, and if you don't like it, you can quit too. And Michael said, I quit. And I said, oh, holy fuck, what have you done?
Yeah. Oh, boy. And,
yeah, but because then, we had this, in those days, astronomically expensive $675 a month apartment that we had to pay rent on, a floor through in Chelsea, and no other source of income other than what the few bits of money that I could bring in by writing for Wee magazine and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of had a very rough year, and I tried the best I could to keep us afloat. Michael stayed under the covers a lot of the time with migraines, and Terry Catchpole by then had moved on to being an editor of the openers section of Wee magazine, which was a magazine started by Playboy in an attempt to compete with some of the more youth-oriented publications like Hustler and so on that had started. Mm-hmm. And so he hired me to do a lot of stuff, and that kind of kept us going. I wrote for a bunch of TNA publications because I wasn't exactly getting, offers from Good Housekeeping at that point on my National Lampoon resume.
Yeah.
and we scraped along, and then Doug, I guess, feeling the guilt of having not stood up for Michael or anything when Michael was fired, or, jumped ship, as it were, gave Michael what was then the very considerable sum of $3,000 because Lampoon, they had a buyout clause in the Lampoon where at the end of 4 years or whatever it was, Maddie had to buy them out. And so Henry and Doug got a bunch of money. This was something that had been set up when the magazine was started. And so Maddie reluctantly had to buy them out. Henry took the money, went home, never went back to the office again. And Doug gave us money. And so that was like, okay, thank God, now we can survive for a little while. And then Lorne Michaels came calling. And he had been turned on to Michael by Marilyn Suzanne Miller, who was a big fan of Michael's. And, you know, Lorne had been doing the Lily specials, Lily Tomlin specials, and Marilyn had written on them. And Marilyn, meanwhile, had been making a fairly good living in L.A., writing for Mary Tyler Moore and Rhoda. And so she told Lorne about Michael, and then Lorne came to town and met both of us. And then he offered Michael a job, and then he also offered me a job, which I turned down. Because in the meantime, I had sold this book with my friend Deanne Stillman and a woman named Penny Stallings. And we had managed to get a book deal with Macmillan to do the first collection of women's humor, Titters, the first collection of humor by women. And I was doing this book, and I said, I can't do this stupid TV show and this book. And then Penny basically said, oh, you have to do it. You can't. This is an offer you can't refuse. And Lorne kind of said, oh, you can do the book. You know, you'll have plenty of time to do both, blah, 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 you know.
Yeah.
Which was completely untrue. And so I ended up on SNL. Thank God I did.
Yeah. Were you hired before Rosie Schuster?
I think since Rosie was married to Lorne, it was always his intention to bring her along.
Okay.
However, I thought that they were still married because Lorne never gave any indication of anything otherwise. And I was sort of planning to ask her, since I was having issues with Michael, about how she managed to work with Lorne and stay married to him. And much to my surprise, when she showed up in New York, she was not living with Lorne, but was instead living with her current boyfriend, Stuart, in a loft downtown, and not with Lorne at all. But I think Lorne always had wanted to hire her, and had some hopes of them getting back together for a while.
Yeah, because it's always been my belief that you were the first female writer on that show.
Well, I might have been the first person who had a signed contract, but I mean, Rosie was there and Marilyn was there. So there were three of us, which was funny because later, when I met the late Bruce J. Friedman, a wonderful guy who later became a good friend of mine, and I met him at some SNL after party one time, and then downstairs, I remember in the plaza at 30 Rock, and he asked me what I did, and I said I was a writer on the show, and he said, oh, you must be Marilyn Suzanne Miller, and I said, no, I'm Ann Beats, and he goes, oh, I didn't realize there were so many women writers.
Yes. Yeah.
All two.
Yeah.
But Rosie and I were the only two for a while because Marilyn left after the first year. And she had health issues, and she left. And then Rosie and I were there for quite a while, just the two of us. And then in the last year that we were there, Sarah Paley joined. So then there were three. But they were never, when I was there were never more than three, and mostly just two.
Yeah. You wrote some great sketches, too, like the Unsafe Christmas Toys Halloween costumes.
Yes, Unsafe Christmas Toys and Unsafe Halloween costumes. That was me and Danny.
That's so brilliant.
Yeah, Unsafe Halloween costumes had a costume that was called Invisible Pedestrian, which was just a black bag you put over your head. And Unsafe Christmas Toys had I still have the sign for it. It had a bag of, it was called Bag of Glass, and it was just a bag of shards of broken glass. And Danny latest Irwin Mainway character go, kids love it. They love it.
Yeah. Got that big old what was it? It was a gun or something.
Well, there was Teddy Chainsaw Bear. That was the main thing at the end.
Yeah.
With a bear with the chainsaw coming out of its stomach. But the bad part about that was I didn't really know how big a chainsaw was. I mean, you can get little handheld chainsaws. But the props department went out and got this huge chainsaw and put it into a very big teddy bear. So it kind of ruined the effect because I had more thought of it as more like a handheld kind of chainsaw.
Yeah.
But that was Teddy Chainsaw Bear. That was one of the unsafe toys.
Yeah. Did you write the Uncle Roy sketches?
Yeah, Rosie and I wrote the Uncle Roy sketches. And for Buck Henry, the late Buck Henry, also really great guy. And those, they don't even show those now.
Yeah, I can
think
imagine.
They're too shocking.
Yeah.
But, I mean, our defense was sort of the lighter side of child molestation. But in defense of Uncle Roy, he never really did anything, to the girls. I mean, they were always sort of the victors in the situation. He never, he was just like at their mercy.
Yeah, that's how comedy works. You got to exaggerate.
Right, but I mean, now you couldn't even do that.
I know, but it's so hilarious in the 1976 context. Especially the line, oh, every family has an Uncle Roy.
Right, and then Danny and Jane would always be so oblivious, like that he gave them a glass coffee table for Christmas.
Yeah.
And Jane would always go, "Oh, Roy, you're too good."
Yeah. That's hilarious.
He was a druggist. He was the town druggist. That was his job.
That's brilliant.
And that was actually the last Uncle Roy we did was on the last show that we worked on, which was where Uncle Roy ends up tied up in a chair with their panties stuffed in his mouth and their little tights tied around him. And he was tied to a chair, and then they both turn the lights out and go to sleep. So that the parents would find him like that coming home, and his cover would be blown.
Yeah. You guys went all out on that last episode because there was there was Alan Zweibel's sketch he tried to get on for years, the Lord and Lady Douchebag sketch.
Yes. Was that Alan Zweibel? I didn't know. I thought it was Franken and Davis, but I guess it was Alan.
It was him and Franken and Davis because I heard him talk about it recently in an interview.
Oh, him and Franken and Davis, yeah, because I was pretty sure they were a major part of that.
Yeah.
I was in that as an extra, I remember.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. There's so many great ones in that era. The prison talent show.
Oh, that was an early one. That was when we were still sort of finding our feet as a show, and that was when Peter Cook was hosting the show.
And Dudley Moore.
And,
yeah.
And I remember they said the line. First of all, Garrett was like this inmate who came out and he's saying, "I'm going to get me a gun and kill all the whiteys I see." And then the line was, "I think we found our Gigi."
Yeah. That's a classic, yeah.
Yeah, it was auditions for the prison musical or whatever.
Yeah, Chevy tells a joke and Gilda's the only one who laughs, and then he attacks her later.
Right, yes.
Yeah. Oh, my God. Of course, there's that classic sketch where Chevy and Richard Pryor are doing the job interview.
I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about how sort of sad it was that now that would just not fly.
Yeah.
And it was such a great piece and such a great commentary.
Yeah.
Because when he says nigger, first of all, he's been running out of terms for white people, like cracker and so on, and he says honky, and then he says nigger, and he goes, dead honky.
Yeah.
And then Chevy offers him the job at twice the salary and all this, and I just thought it was so clever and funny, and now just because it had the N-word in it, you would not be able to do it.
Yeah.
Would say it was racist and whatever and completely misinterpret it, whereas I thought it was a wonderfully incisive commentary.
Me too. I mean, they still show it to this day, like in clips, for like Richard Pryor's, biography or something.
Oh, they will show it, really?
Yeah.
Because I just thought, oh God, now they're just so the political correctness. I mean, listen, I'm as politically. In fact, I'm right now wearing a shirt that I got because I needed to have something to commemorate this period. I'm wearing a shirt that says "I can't breathe" on it. So I'm as politically correct as anybody, or as anarchistic as anyone, shall we say. Mm-hmm. But I just kind of really hate the idea that there so much censorship.
I do too.
In the name of political correctness.
I do too. It's insane.
Because I always believed with Michael Donaghue that nothing is sacred.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Nothing
is sacred. And which was one of the issues of the Lampoon, where they showed the Che Guevara poster with a pie in the face. The nothing sacred issue. Because I mean, Lockley used to say, if you can't laugh at death, what can you laugh at?
Exactly. I have a very dark...
And I feel like that's it. I mean, that, there's the emperor's not wearing any clothes, and so I feel like that it's really... I'm really upset when people get into these politically correct censorship things. Like when, what's her name, Kathy, had that head of Trump. And
Kathy Griffin.
So, Kathy Griffin?
Griffin, yeah.
Yeah, and everybody got so upset and was like, oh, it was so tasteless and horrible. And I mean, first of all, you could clearly see that it wasn't a real thing. It was more like an art piece,
Right.
The head was more like an art piece than it was like anything super realistic. And I just thought, God, what? What? I mean, I was fully on her side.
Yeah.
And I was fully on the side of Bill Maher, too, when he said that the people who flew the planes into the World Trade Towers could not be described as cowardly. And he got fired for that.
I know.
And I mean, it's absolutely right. No, it's not cowardly.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be horrific and stupid and all those things, but cowardly, no.
Yeah. I was on Kathy Griffin's side, not just because of the political agenda, but just because of, I thought it was hilarious.
Listen, if it had been ahead of Hillary Clinton, I would have been on her side. I mean, I of course was more on her side because of my Trump hatred.
Right.
But I would have been on her side no matter who was ahead of.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Do you have any?
And I mean, I also think, it's interesting because, with my students, when they write villains or whatever, I'm always saying to them, you can't just write these people that are just black and white. You can't write villains that are completely without any redeeming characteristics. I mean, and I say, even Hitler, he was a vegetarian non-smoker who loved his dog.
Yeah.
His dog was named Blondie.
Yeah.
And, in fact, I actually sort of feel like, of course, so far, I guess you could say that Trump is responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of people, but he hasn't actually put them in camps. Well, he has put them in camps, but he hasn't started, an organized system of extermination quite yet.
Yeah.
But in some ways, I almost feel like he's worse than Hitler because I can't detect any vestiges of humanity in him.
Yeah, sociopathology.
Yeah, I can't see like he cares about anybody. I suppose he cares about Ivanka, but he seems to care about her more like some sort of trophy than as a person.
Yeah, he cares about himself for sure.
Yeah, and I can't detect even like a fingernail's worth of empathy.
Yeah, it's insane. Do you have any good stories about the icons who hosted Saturday Night Live?
Well, I think that the people that we like the best would be people like Buck Henry, who was always willing to come and fill in in when someone like Burt Reynolds had canceled.
Mm-hmm.
Were the people who are willing to play along,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of surrenders themselves to the experience. Candace Bergen said that it was a bit like Stockholm syndrome, where you became sympathetic with your kidnappers.
Right.
And I think that the people who were more prone to Stockholm syndrome were the people that we liked the best. And the Pythons were like that, especially Michael Palin. I mean, Eric was always a bit more snooty and picky about what he would or wouldn't do. But, Michael Palin was great because, I mean, he put cats in his pants and danced. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
And then, of course, we got a lot of letters from the animal cruelty people about that, although the cats didn't actually really suffer too much. And unfortunately, they shat in his pants, and then he had to go right from that to a scene where he played a priest in a confessional with Bill, and it was apparently pretty bad because the cat poop was, just invading the scene.
Yeah.
The smell of it. But we also got a lot of letters about Danny's famous Bassomatic commercial where he put a dead fish in a blender.
Love it. It's classic.
I mean, like, excuse me, hello, it was a dead fish.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that we liked those people the best because they were willing to just join in the spirit of things.
Yeah. Buck Henry, Steve Martin, Elliot Gould.
Yeah, and that's why people like that got asked back.
Yeah. Candace Bergen, a lot of people kept coming back. I heard.
Yeah, exactly. And the more difficult hosts, I mean, usually the women were more difficult, and I think that was partly because, sort of they had suffered at the hands of Hollywood to get where they were.
Yeah.
Like Cicely Tyson wouldn't stay at the Berkshire place because she'd once been accosted there and accused of being a hooker. And she was just really difficult. I mean, she was super difficult. And like Raquel Welch was no picnic either.
Yeah.
And I mean, what was interesting to me was a lot of those people, like, were so vain that they wore glasses, or they needed to wear glasses in order to read the cue cards, but they didn't have contact lenses. And I said, what? That's so weird. You're an actor. Why wouldn't you have contact lenses if you don't have good vision? So then, like, the letters for Raquel Welch had to be, like, about 3 inches high because she couldn't read the cue cards otherwise.
Oh, my God. I heard...
Without her glasses.
Yeah. I heard
that... didn't wear.
I heard that Milton Berle was difficult.
Oh, Milton Berle was awful. I really didn't... I wasn't around too much that week because I was homesick. And so I really didn't have to suffer through Milton Berle too much, but I know that he was constantly trying to display his endowment, as it were, to the PAs and people who were bringing him his script in his dressing room and stuff.
Oh, God. And,
so he was really difficult, and Louise Lasser was extraordinarily difficult.
Oh, yeah. I've heard a lot of stories about her being a diva.
Yeah, she was, like, probably my nominee for worst host.
Well, the musical...
So Cicely Tyson ran a close second, and I remember at one point, I said to Lauren, why do I have to go and tell her? And he goes, you're the closest thing to a black woman we have.
That's a great response.
Which I took as a compliment, actually.
Yeah. That's great.
And then another person that was difficult, but just for different reasons, was Walter Matthau.
Oh.
Who was really nice and was like, I mean, in Walter Matthau, he made movies with Billy Wilder. I mean, he was like a legendary person. But he, like, at one point, he was doing this scene and decided it would be hilarious if he did it with, like, a Scottish accent. Mm-hmm. And I remember having to go and tell him not to do that. Mm-hmm. Between Dress and Air.
How did that go over?
He accepted it. He accepted it.
Yeah, I remember that Bad News Bees sketch he did.
Yes.
I heard Charles Grodin didn't want to be there.
I don't know. Charles Grodin, I remember Charles Grodin did a Hire the Incompetent sketch that Rosie wrote that was pretty funny.
Yeah. And what about the genius of Tom Schiller?
Yeah, well, Tom Schiller made such wonderful films, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just really wonderful and offbeat films.
It's ironic how those two that he did, the one with Gilda where she's in France.
I know, the one in France?
It was a takeoff of Fellini.
Oh, yeah, it's more like Italy. It's a Fellini takeoff. Yeah, I'm in that, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody was at 1/5 going, Gilda, Gilda. Yeah, that film, and then the Belushi dancing on the graves one.
Yeah. It's ironic how those two films have the two cast members that are no longer with us, and yet Peter Ackroyd did the Java Junkie one.
I know, that was brilliant, don't you think? I always thought that was brilliant, Java Junkie.
That's always been one of my favorites, yes.
And I also really like the one that Bill Murray did, the Perchance to Dream one, where he's a Shakespearean, he's a bum who calls into a theater, and then he does a Shakespearean soliloquy.
I don't remember that one.
Oh, yeah, he plays this honker character that he used to do, which is sort of like a homeless kind of guy. And he goes into a theater to keep warm, and then he ends up falling asleep, and then he becomes Hamlet, I think.
Oh, I don't remember that one.
Oh, yeah, it's brilliant.
But yeah, I mean, it's so ironic that, Gilda and Belushi are no longer with us doing those two very poignant films. And yet Peter Ackroyd is still alive, but where did his career go after that?
I know. Well, yeah, Peter was in the shadow, I guess, of Danny. It was difficult for him.
Yeah, I know he was more into music, and he contributed some songs to Dan Aykroyd's movies.
Yeah, I mean, Peter's a great guy, but I think he had some issues.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah.
Gilda had you write her Broadway show with her, right?
Right. Well, everybody worked on it, and I mean, one of the things we contributed, of course, was Rosie and I did a Nerds piece for that show.
Yeah.
Which was kind of cool because we got everyone in the audience to sing along to The Way We Were.
Yeah.
We actually handed out music sheets.
I remember being 12 years old, renting that concert
movie. Oh, the movie of that?
Yes.
Directed by Mike Nichols, no less.
Directed by Mike Nichols, yes. And I just
my only feature credit.
Oh, yeah, and I just remember, watching it, and I see, the Gilda that I know and love, and then she goes right into Let's Talk Dirty to the Animals, and I put my hand over my mouth just laughing out loud.
That was Michael, yeah.
Yeah.
That was Donaghue. He wrote that.
Oh,
and then she does that Nadia Comaneci thing that's pretty funny, too, where she's like the little gymnast.
Yeah, I remember that.
It's funny because with the whole thing, the reason we picked Marvin Hamlish as being her ideal is because we thought of him as like the most nerdy person possible.
Yeah.
Like, who could be more nerdy than Marvin Hamlish? And I heard later that Marvin Hamlish, after Gilda had died, there was some sort of memorial for her in Toronto, which Marvin Hamlish performed The Way We Were, like straight.
Yeah.
And we were like, ooh, okay.
Yeah.
We believed it.
And of course, she ends the show with that girl group song. And
yes, Saccharin, Goodbye Saccharin.
Yes, Goodbye Saccharin. It makes
Which is also ironic.
Yes, it makes me cry when I see it because I'm sure everybody watching would not predict, that everyone would lose her 10 years later,
No. Belushi you might have been able to predict, but not Gilda.
Yeah, it's sad.
No, and of course Saccharin may have contributed to her death, actually, because she used to put it in her tab.
Mm-hmm.
She used to add vodka and saccharin to her tab.
Oh, wow. So after Saturday Night Live, did you move to L.A. and then create Square Pegs?
Well, no, it was sort of the other way around in that I created Square Pegs. After everybody left, then everyone left, and at the same time as Lauren, left. And when my agent at the time, Frank Cooper, started talking to me about, he said, "Oh, I bet you were, popular in high."
Mm-hmm. Popular in what?
So he was like, "Oh, what did you do in high school?" And I said, "Oh, I was a complete nerd in high school."
Yeah.
And so he said, "Well, why don't you write about that?" And he knew that CBS was trying to find like a youth show or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so he took me into CBS, and I pitched it to them. And then I was supposed to pitch it at NBC, but they called me up and said, they had a few questions for me. I was getting ready to go to an NBC pitch meeting in the morning at the Chateau the next day. And they said, well, would it have to, what about sex, drugs, would it have any of those things? And I said, no, because these girls don't have sex. They sort of aspire to have it. But that's not what's going on with them.
Yeah.
So I answered their questions satisfactorily, and they bought the show. And so I went back to bed, never pitched it to NBC, which would actually have been a better home for it. But
yeah,
and CBS was the Tiffany network at the time, and they couldn't deal with any shows that were not top rated.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I tried to get Amy Linker on here a few weeks ago. And
oh, really?
Yeah, first she expressed enthusiasm, and then, she asked me if I would send her questions. I did, and then all of a sudden she's like, I don't do interviews, and that was really, really weird.
It is strange. She didn't like your questions, I guess.
I like to think I'm a non-intrusive interviewer,
Uh-huh. Well, I think you're very sympathetic.
Thank you.
She and I are in touch, but she never mentioned anything to me about it, of course.
Well, it's okay. I mean, some people have their issues and their
demons.
Hold on a second. Yeah.
Hold on a second. No, they aren't. No, they're gone. Hi.
Yeah.
Anyway, I sort of have to wrap this up myself because I need to get going.
Oh, that's fine. It's been such a pleasure, Ann. And I was wondering really quickly, do you have any projects that are shelved because of quarantine that you're going to do in the future?
Well, I'm teaching at Chapman University, and I'm having to teach remotely because of quarantine, which is okay. I'm managing. And, my friend and I are working on and have put together a sizzle reel for a project called The Girl in the Room. My writing and producing partner from Hollywood days, Eve Branstein, who I originally met on Square Pegs when she was Norman Lear's casting director, have a project called The Girl in the Room, which is a documentary about just that, about women in comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And because Gilda always said that, she would be the girl on the show or the girl in the room.
Right.
And that's what I was. And so we did interviews we actually have interview footage with Phyllis Diller and Joan Rivers both. Nice. And Penny Marshall.
Nice. Oh, God, Penny Marshall, she was such a genius. I loved her.
And so, we're trying to see whether, post-COVID we can do something with that. Because I think that two forms, documentary and animation, are going to be front and center in the next period because it's going to be much easier to do them. Mm-hmm.
Well, I hope that project comes to fruition, and if it does, maybe you can come back on and we can talk about it.
Oh, absolutely, thanks. And, I'd be happy to talk to you about the second half of my career sometime in the future if you want to.
Oh, yes, I would love to do that. Well, Ann, you have a great day, and stay safe because we need you.
All right. Well, thanks so much. You too.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Take care. Well, there you have it. Ann Beats. Ain't she a sweetheart? Oh, my God, what a kind and hilarious lady. I mean, irreverent as they come, and she says that she's politically correct, but she hasn't lost that biting edge that she had in her 70s writing. I mean, she is just laugh out loud hilarious, as you can tell, and I'm glad I got to talk to her today. If you like this video, everyone, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Add me as a friend on Facebook. Join my Tommy Kovac Comedian page on Facebook. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram and all that fun stuff. Well, that's all the time we have this week on Splat from the Past. Until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Later, dudes!